In 2007, the richest man in the world paid $0 in federal income tax. Not a reduced amount, not a clever discount, zero. His name was Jeff Bezos, and he did it again in 2011. In 2018, Elon Musk, the second richest human being on the planet, also paid nothing in federal income tax. George Soros did it 3 years in a row. Michael Bloomberg, Carl Icahn, the same story. Now here's the part that should make you sit up. None of them broke the law, not one. There was no offshore account being raided, no secret crime, no accountant getting hauled off in handcuffs. Everything you're about to hear is completely, boringly, perfectly legal. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how it works, well enough to explain it to someone else. There's a name for this strategy. The people who study wealth call it buy, borrow, die. Once you see it, I promise you, you will never look at money or taxes or the people at the very top the same way again. Let's get into it. Here's the thing almost nobody understands about how rich people actually get taxed. And it's not your fault you don't know it. The system was practically designed to be confusing. We're all taught the same simple story growing up. You work, you earn money, the government takes a slice. The more you make, the bigger the slice. It feels fair. The billionaire in his mansion should pay more than the teacher in her apartment, right? But that story has a hidden assumption buried inside it. An assumption so quiet that most people never even notice it's there. The assumption is that rich people have income. And here's the secret. At the very top, they mostly don't. Not the kind you and I have. Think about your own life for a second. Your money comes from a paycheck. It's wages, and wages are the single most heavily taxed, most visible, most unavoidable type of money in the entire system. Your employer reports it. The taxes come out before you ever touch a cent. You couldn't hide it if you tried. The wealthy figured out something a long time ago. The trick isn't to hide your income. The trick is to never have income in the first place. That sounds impossible. How do you live, buy houses, planes, anything without income? Stay with me because the answer is the entire game. To understand this, you need one single piece of knowledge, just one. And it's the most important sentence in this whole video, so let it sink in. In the United States, you are not taxed on something you own until you sell it. That's it. That's the keystone the entire fortune is built on. Let me show you why it matters so much. Imagine you buy a share of stock for $1. Over the years, that share climbs to $1,000. On paper, you just made $999. So how much tax do you owe on that gain? Nothing. Zero. Not a penny. As long as you don't sell that share, the government cannot touch the growth. In the tax world, this is called an unrealized gain. A profit that exists, that's real, that you could spend against, but that hasn't been officially cashed in. And unrealized gains are invisible to the tax system. Now scale that up. Elon Musk didn't get rich from a Tesla paycheck. He got rich because he owns hundreds of millions of shares of Tesla and SpaceX that he acquired when they were worth almost nothing. As those companies exploded in value, his net worth went from millions to billions to hundreds of billions. And because he never sold the bulk of it, on paper, that staggering growth generated almost no taxable income at all. Here's a piece of wisdom worth tattooing on your brain. The wealthy don't measure their money in income. They measure it in assets. Income is what you earn. Assets are what you own. And the tax code treats those two things in wildly, almost unbelievably different ways. Your income is taxed every single year, automatically. Your assets can grow, untouched and untaxed, for decades. So now we have step one. The billionaire buys assets that grow in value and then does the single most powerful thing in all of investing. Almost nothing. They just hold. They wait. They let it compound, tax-free. But that creates an obvious problem, doesn't it? If you never sell, where does the actual cash come from? You can't buy a yacht with a stock certificate. That brings us to the clever part. Here's the move that separates the ultra-wealthy from everyone else. When a billionaire needs cash, real, spendable money, They don't sell their stock. Selling would realize the gain and trigger a massive tax bill. Instead, they do something that sounds almost too simple to be this powerful. They borrow. A bank looks at a billionaire holding, say, $50 billion in stock and sees the safest customer imaginable. So the bank says, don't sell anything. Just pledge some of those shares as collateral and we'll hand you cash. It's called a securities-backed line of credit, and the ultra-wealthy use it constantly. Elon Musk has pledged tens of millions of his own Tesla shares to back personal loans. Now here's why this is pure magic, and this is the heart of the whole strategy. Borrowed money is not income. When you take out a loan, you don't pay tax on it. Why? Because a loan isn't a gain, it's a debt. You have to pay it back. The government doesn't tax debt. So the billionaire walks away with millions of dollars in cash to spend on absolutely anything. And from the tax system's point of view, nothing happened. No sale, no income, no tax. Let that fully register. The richest people on Earth fund their entire lifestyles, the homes, the jets, the art, with borrowed money. Specifically because borrowed money is invisible to the IRS, and it gets even better for them. Remember, you and I think of debt as a burden. We hear loan and we think of interest, of being trapped, of struggling to pay it back. But for a billionaire, the math flips completely upside down. Because they're such safe borrowers, banks lend to them at incredibly low interest rates, rates a normal person could only dream of. Often that rate is lower than the rate at which their assets are growing. Think about what that means. If your stock portfolio grows 8% a year and the bank lends to you at 3%, you are effectively being paid to borrow. You're spending money you never have to earn, backed by wealth that keeps growing faster than the cost of the loan. This is the second great piece of wisdom in this video. For the poor, debt is a chain. For the rich, debt is a tool. Same word, opposite meaning. The entire difference comes down to whether the thing you borrowed against is going up in value or down. So now our billionaire has bought assets, watched them grow tax-free, and borrowed against them to live like a king, still without paying meaningful tax. But there's one last problem. Eventually, those loans have to be settled. Eventually, every person, even a billionaire, runs out of road. And that's where the final, almost unbelievable piece of the puzzle clicks into place. This is the part that sounds dark, but it's the secret engine that makes the whole machine run. It's the reason the strategy isn't called buy and borrow. It's called buy, borrow, die. Eventually, the wealthy person passes away. And under United States tax law, there's a provision waiting at the finish line called the step-up in basis. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most powerful tax rules in existence, and most people have never even heard of it. Here's how it works. Remember our share of stock that grew from $1 to $1,000? If the owner had ever sold it while alive, they'd owe tax on that $999 of gain. That tax debt has been hanging over the asset its entire life, a ticking bomb the owner kept dodging by never selling. But when the owner dies and passes that stock to their children, the tax code does something extraordinary. It resets the clock. The cost of that asset, its basis, is wiped clean and bumped up to whatever it's worth on the day of death. That $1,000 share? In the eyes of the law, the heirs are now treated as if they bought it for $1,000. And the entire lifetime of growth, that $999 of gain that was never once taxed, simply vanishes forever. The heirs can turn around and sell the stock the very next day and owe almost nothing. So watch the full chain snap together. The billionaire bought assets and never paid tax on the growth. They borrowed against those assets to live and never paid tax on the cash. They died, and the step-up in basis erased the tax bill entirely. The outstanding loans get paid off cleanly from the estate. The heirs inherit a fortune scrubbed of decades of taxes. And then, here's the kicker. The children start the cycle all over again. Buy, borrow, die, generation after generation. The wealth doesn't just survive, it compounds, untaxed, essentially forever. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds like a nice theory. Does it actually happen? Let me give you the receipts because the numbers are genuinely staggering. In 2021, the newsroom ProPublica got hold of something no one outside the IRS had ever seen: the actual tax records of thousands of America's wealthiest people spanning more than 15 years. And what they found broke the entire fairy tale of everyone pays their fair share. Listen to these numbers. Between 2014 and 2018, the 25 richest Americans saw their collective wealth grow by $401 billion. Over that same period, they paid a true tax rate of just 3.4%. 3.4%. Now compare that to a typical American worker. ProPublica found that an average wage earner in their 40s saw their wealth grow by about $65,000 over those years, and paid roughly $62,000 in taxes over that same stretch. The worker handed over nearly $1 in tax for every dollar of wealth they built. The billionaires handed over about 3 cents. And the individual cases are even sharper. When you measure the tax he paid against how much his fortune actually grew, Jeff Bezos' true tax rate came out to roughly 1%. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men who has ever lived, clocked in at around 0.1%. You very likely paid a higher tax rate last year than Warren Buffett did. These aren't estimates from a critic. These are the IRS's own records. ProPublica put it plainly. The wealthiest can, perfectly legally, pay income taxes that are only a tiny fraction of what their fortunes grow each year. Even Buffett himself once admitted the game was rigged in his favor. Years ago, he said in so many words that there had been class warfare going on for decades, and his class was the one that won. So the natural question, the one screaming in your head right now is, how is any of this allowed? And here's the uncomfortable, fascinating answer. Every single piece of this strategy, taken on its own, exists for a reason that actually sounds pretty sensible. Why don't we tax unrealized gains, the growth on things people own but haven't sold? Well, imagine the chaos. Every year you'd have to calculate the exact value of every house, every business, every painting, every share in the country. And people might be forced to sell things they love, a family farm, a family business, just to pay a tax bill on a profit they never actually pocketed. So we wait until the sale. That's not crazy. Why don't we tax loans? Because a loan isn't income. It's debt. Taxing money you have to give back would be bizarre. Also not crazy. Why does the step-up in basis exist? Partly to spare grieving families from the nightmare of digging up decades-old records to prove what great-grandpa paid for a stock in 1962. Reasonable on its face. Here's the twist that the whole controversy hangs on. Each rule is defensible alone. It's only when you chain all three together that you get a machine that lets the wealthiest people on Earth opt out of the tax system almost entirely. A door that's open to people with vast assets and effectively closed to everyone living on a paycheck. That's the real debate. Critics say it's a fundamental unfairness baked into the system, that a nurse pays a higher rate than a billionaire, and that's indefensible. Defenders argue the wealth gets taxed eventually through the estate tax, and that taxing unrealized gains every year would wreck investment, punish risk-taking, and tank the economy that everyone depends on. There have been real attempts to break the chain, proposals for a billionaire minimum tax aimed squarely at this exact strategy. But so far, none of them have become law. I'm not going to tell you which side is right. That's genuinely one of the hardest questions in economics, and smart, honest people land on opposite sides of it. But you can't have an opinion worth holding on a system you don't understand. And now, you understand it better than almost everyone around you. So, let's bring it all the way home. The next time you see a headline screaming that some billionaire paid nothing in taxes, you won't feel that vague, confused anger anymore. You'll know the truth. It usually isn't fraud. It isn't some illegal offshore scheme. It's strategy. It's 3 quiet rules: buy and hold, borrow against it, and let death erase the bill, working together exactly as they're written. And here's the final thought I want to leave you with. You and I will probably never own $50 billion in stock. But the principles underneath this aren't magic, and they aren't only for billionaires. Owning assets instead of just earning wages. Understanding the difference between good debt and bad debt. Thinking in decades instead of paychecks. Those ideas scale all the way down. The billionaires are just playing the most extreme version of a game that, in a smaller way, anyone can learn the rules to. The wealthy were never taught a secret you weren't allowed to know. They were just taught to ask a different question. Not how much can I earn, but what can I own, and how long can I hold it? If this changed the way you see money, do me a favor and subscribe. Because in the very next video, we're pulling apart the other half of this machine. How the rich use debt to get richer, while the rest of us use it to get poorer. It's the engine underneath everything you just heard, and it's going to surprise you. I'll see you in the next one.